Well, I'm joined now by DW's Teri Schultz at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Good evening to you, Teri. You know, you have covered NATO for many years. You've seen many of these summits. I dare say you've never seen a summit with a U.S. president going from cold to hot, back to cold, all in one day. Tell us from where you are standing, what did you see and hear today?
Well, you're right. The breakfast was quite a shocking way to start the day. This was due to be just a simple photo op. In fact, I understand that it was the U.S. side who said there wouldn't be any remarks, but you can never guarantee that with President Trump. And so nobody expected him to just hold forth against Germany, and to be so specific in saying that Germany's Nord Stream deal is unfair because then the U.S. is paying for German defense. Now, this is something that NATO has been very careful to try to keep separate. They never want trade issues, energy issues, anything else to compromise security issues. And they've done a pretty good job so far, but after today, that's all over.
Yeah, the U.S. president, speaking of Nord Stream, he said that Germany is captive of Russia because of that Nord Stream pipeline. Now, the pipeline delivers natural gas from Russia to Germany via the Baltic Sea. There are other members of NATO that do not like the pipeline. But, Teri, has it ever been a divisive issue inside of NATO? And would you say it's in the interest of the U.S. and NATO for Trump to attack the pipeline now?
Well, that's a lot of questions. There are also other members of NATO who will also benefit from this pipeline. And we should point out it's not operational yet. It's still in the construction phase. So President Trump's figures were wrong. Germany does not get 70% of its energy from Russia. So I haven't seen quite enough fact checking on that. Again, this is not an issue that comes up officially at NATO. Because they try to keep issues separate from security. But of course, with 22 of the NATO members, also European Union members, where energy is an official issue, it's discussed on the sidelines. And I hear that, it does come up, but it has not come up as an official agenda item at NATO. And you've always got to remember that with President Trump, you've got to look at business interests. And the U.S. would very much like to export more LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe, and it has started doing so. So this could be, something where President Trump would like to make a quid pro quo with Germany buying more LNG from the U.S. instead of from Russia. We just don't know exactly what was behind these remarks today because it was a surprise.
There were also the attacks on all members of NATO for not spending enough money on their own defense. But members of NATO, they are increasing their defense spending, and they have until 2024 to reach the goals that were agreed upon. So why does the U.S. president then continue to hammer this point?
Actually, the 2024 goal is not a deadline. What the Wales language said was that all allies would aim to move toward the 2% guideline. Now, think how weak that language is. Aim to move towards. That means that any spending increase basically qualifies under this guideline. And that's what Germany says to defend itself. It says we didn't promise to be at 2% by 2024, and we won't be. Germany actually doesn't commit to ever spend 2% of its GDP on defense. So Germany says that the 1.5% it will reach by then is still in the right direction, and that will be an 80% increase overall in German defense spending. So they justify that by saying, hey, we're moving in the right direction, which is all we committed to do in that Wales language. It still isn't enough for the United States, which spends about 3.5% of its GDP on defense. So you can see why they feel that things are unfair. And NATO itself says the defense sharing is unfair at the moment, and that they will try to rectify that. And the increase in defense spending that all 29 allies are making will go a long way toward making that more fair. It won't be even, but the United States is always going to spend more on defense than European countries.
And that's an important point to make, and I think that's also a point that the members of Congress realize. It's fair to say that no one was surprised that Mr. Trump unloaded at the summit today. Particularly members of Congress. In fact, while Mr. Trump was flying from Washington to Brussels, the U.S. Senate voted on a motion in support of NATO. Now, Senator Jack Reed introduced that motion, and he said on the Senate floor, unfortunately, this motion has become necessary because some of our closest allies have come to question the U.S. commitment to collective self-defense. President Trump has at times called the alliance obsolete. Our allies are starting to wonder whether they can rely on the United States to come to their defense in a crisis. Now, the subtext here is pay up or we will not guarantee your security. Is that a credible threat there at NATO headquarters, Terry? Do people really think that would ever happen?
They have good reason to be worried about that because President Trump has implied that on more than one occasion, including just last week at a campaign rally in Montana where he spoke about Chancellor Merkel by her first name. He said, I told Angela that I couldn't guarantee it, meaning the protection of Germany. He has said more than once that perhaps the U.S. would only come to the defense of those countries that spend 2% of their GDP, which wouldn't be a very big group. So, yes, I think NATO allies are wondering this because he said that. And that's really a red line at NATO. Article 5 is the bedrock of NATO. It is the founding principle of the alliance, all for one and one for all. And that's a very, very dangerous line for President Trump to be crossing.
I want you to take a listen to what Germany's foreign minister said today in response to Trump's claim that Russia controls Germany.
We are not prisoners, neither of Russia nor the US. We're one of the guarantors of the free world, and it'll stay that way.
You know, Terry, it's interesting. He said we're not captive of Russia and we're not captive of the United States. Will Trump leave this summit less of an ally to NATO and more of a friend to Russia? What do you think?
NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg has said that his main priority is to keep the alliance together. And so if you ask anybody here at NATO, that is their core task, to 29 allies standing together, ready to defend each other. But I think that, you know, you've also got to remember that there are countries inside NATO who appreciate what President Trump has done. He has pushed countries to spend more, and that's something that NATO itself wanted. It's something that the countries who do spend 2% would like to see their counterparts do. So it's not everyone who doesn't like what President Trump is saying. I think that this 2% issue has sort of been like letting a genie out of a bottle, though. It was useful for a while. It was useful for NATO to have the United States, you know, harping on about this over and over. Now it's just gotten too big, and it's creating division between allies. But, you know, there are some countries that think that President Trump performed a useful task in making this such an obsession for a long time now. I think that by the end of tomorrow, if he hasn't revoked the communique like he did at the G7 meeting, NATO will still be breathing a sigh of relief and say that all of these things that they agreed are a success. They wish President Trump would say also that the increase in allies' defense spending is a success and take that home instead of continuing to battle on about it.
Yeah, like you say, the next 24 hours will be just as crucial as the past 24 hours. Teri Schultz for us at NATO headquarters tonight in Brussels.
That's right.
Terry, thank you.